This chapter transports us to Venice, the great maritime republic. Malvasia was more than a wine. It was a narrative carried in barrels across the Adriatic, Ionian, and Aegean seas. So Venetian merchants didn't just sell wine, they sold the story of exotic origins, luxurious indulgence, and social status. Here in this case, we see the birth of what we might call wine branding. So Malvasia wasn't valuable only because of taste. It became valuable because of the stories woven around it, its association with nobility, with the excitement of far-off lands, and with the prestige at the time of the Venetian trade.
Welcome to a special series on the Italian Wine Podcast. In this series, Italian wine ambassador Ryan Robinson reads and reflects on the art of wine storytelling, the latest book by renowned scholar Professor Attilio Scienza. From the myths of ancient Greece to the language of modern wine communication, the book explores how storytelling shapes our understanding of wine, and why these stories matter more now than ever. Let's begin the journey.
Welcome back to The Art of Wine Storytelling. I'm your host, Ryan Robinson. In today's episode, we continue our journey through Professor Attilio Scienza's book, The Art of Wine Storytelling. We'll be exploring 3 fascinating chapters, chapters 10 through 12. These chapters help us understand how the ways we tell stories about wine have evolved across cultures and across the period of centuries. We'll begin with the structure of organized storytelling. In this chapter, we look at how narrative framework shape the way that we communicate meaning and memory. Then we'll sail to Venice, where Malvasia wine became a vehicle for trade, prestige, and what we might call the birth of modern storytelling. And finally, we'll dive into synesthesia and Proust syndrome, where we'll explore the sensory layers of wine and how memory, aroma, and taste connect us with our own past. Each chapter connects us to today's wine world, how sommeliers, producers, and educators use these very principles to share the story of wine with authenticity and emotion. So let's get started. The structure of organized storytelling. The main elements of storytelling are represented by the story, which focuses on the what, and the plot, which focuses on the how. In the story, together with the actions and events, the characters move in a defined environment. The discourse is instead articulated on the structures chosen for transmission and in the manifestation in the media. Normally, the narrative is organized on 2 models. The so-called all-encompassing one, which develops on sagas, epics and legends, and stories, short stories, podcasts, and novels. And the fragmentary one, used mainly by the media, gossip, news, and rumors. They are 2 different ways of communicating. In the second case, it is a very rapid and non-exhaustive form of storytelling, which serves to create curiosity, while with short stories or novels, the narration offers stimuli and arguments that can be developed with other techniques, such as cinematography or theater. The performance of wine storytelling must bring together 4 key elements: the story, its setting, the subliminal effect of vocabulary and metaphors, and, fundamental in a novel, a stimulus or narrative tension that invites the reader to turn the next page. On the internet and social media, narrative and tension is increasingly important. In the case of the narrative related to wine, an interdisciplinary approach is necessary to involve all the elements that are the basis of its production. The narrative macro areas include humanistic attempts, historical, literary, archaeological, anthropological content, and scientific skills, such as those related to paleoclimate and grape variety. This is a challenge because it is difficult to find all these skills in the people who write about and communicate wine through storytelling. As in all self-respecting stories, a narrator is also needed. What is the role of the narrator? 2 aspects are fundamental: the allocation of the story to a literary genre, thriller, mystery, romantic, nonfiction, scientific, fantasy, and the choice of the plot, epic, tragedy, melodrama, comedy. These bringing together the rhythm of the story with the unfolding events. Chapter: Venice, Malvasia, and the Birth of Modern Storytelling. Venice and the trade of Malvasia wine is a good example of storytelling because it uses an anticipatory communication strategy that goes beyond the canons of the classic narrative previously employed by the Mediterranean wine trade, relying on a very simple strategy that was based on two tools that are still current: the brand, so the name Malvasia, and the notoriety, an exclusive wine for the European courts. Venice sensed that it was necessary to transform wine from a food item into a cult object, an icon. If the Greeks had linked wine to Dionysus for ritual use in the symposium, Venice loaded the wines of the Eastern Mediterranean with secular values, transforming them into fashion, a remedy for the body and spirit in a Europe afflicted by the anime of Black Death and followed by the Little Ice Age. Venice did not use the Greek symbolism of death and resurrection from grapes to wine, nor that of the mystical blood of the Christian rite, but instead relied on the more modern phenomenon of the status symbol, closer to the models of imperial Rome, of the place of origin and of rarity. Adopting ante litteram, the most effective methods of contemporary communications, linking those wines to an elitist consumption, giving them to the rulers of time, offering them during official banquets where they would be tasted by diplomatic corps from all over Europe. Venice applied high custom tariffs to these wines to limit their consumption only to the wealthy classes, while valuing the sense of origin and the allure of distant territories full of mystery, such as those under Byzantine control. Using the name of the place to market it, an absolutely novelty in the era in which wines were designated with very generic indications. Diploma de Monte, or grape variety. It offered consumers a type of wine sweet and aromatic, yet unknown in the West. Synesthesia and Proust syndrome. Synesthesia, in the strict sense, is a neurological phenomenon in which the stimulation of one sense automatically causes a response in another. Normally, in sensory perception, be it visual, auditory, olfactory, or tactile, one modality prevails over the others. In the case of synesthesia, on the other hand, seeing or letting, or a number of spontaneously leads to recognizing a certain color, listening to a certain piece of music, or the sound of a word simultaneously leads you to perceive a specific flavor. It is not an association of ideas, but rather a real sensory experience. By extension, the concept of synesthesia is also borrowed to describe multisensory and evocative experience in which different sensations intertwine, evoking memories and emotions. In wine tasting, this multisensory dimension plays a fundamental role. The characteristics of the wine can develop deep connections with memory and individual experience, evoking images, sounds, or emotions linked to the moments lived. Two significant literary testimonies can help us better understand this phenomenon. Gaston Blanchard, in his Le Droit de Cire, writes, "This glass of clear, fresh, dry wine sums up my whole country life. People think I drink, but I remember." Marcel Proust, in Search of Lost Time, intertwines personal memories, historical facts, taste sensations, and emotions through a diachronic and didactic approach to events. The episode in which, passing in front of the Swan House, Proust smells the Madeleines. This is iconic, and this reawakens him in childhood memories and the bond with his mother, who made those sweets. The olfactory sensation becomes a key to open the trunk of memory. When tasting wine and presenting it to an attentive consumer, we should try to arouse, through the mechanism of the so-called Proust syndrome, the memory of a pleasant sensation experienced in the past, evoking those sensory descriptors present in the multiplicity of foods, flowers, or sounds that accompany all phases of our life. Reflecting back on these 3 chapters, in Chapter 10, The Structure of Organized Storytelling, Professor Scienza reminds us that storytelling is not random. It has structure, rhythm, and order. So in wine, we see this every day. A tasting note on its own is a structured story. We have the beginning with the appearance of the wine, moving through the aromas, unfolding on the palate, and concluding with the finish. A strategy that would make any Court of Master Sommeliers or Wine Scholar Guild or WSET candidate very proud. But organized storytelling goes well beyond tasting. When a winemaker explains the origin of their vineyard, they aren't just listing facts, they're building a narrative with tension, release, and resolution. Today, I think modern wine education mirrors this. Think of the Court of Master Sommeliers' deductive tasting grid or WSET's systematic approach to taste. These frameworks aren't just tools, they're forms of organized storytelling that help us communicate wine in a more universally understood language. This structure creates reliability, but the story also gives life. Looking at Chapter 11, Venice, Malvasia, and the Birth of Modern Storytelling, this chapter transports us to Venice, the great maritime republic. Malvasia was more than a wine. It was a narrative carried in barrels across the Adriatic, Ionian, and Aegean seas. So Venetian merchants didn't just sell wine, they sold the story of exotic origins, luxurious indulgence, and social status. Here in this case, we see the birth of what we might call wine branding. So Malvasia wasn't valuable only because of taste. It became valuable because of the stories woven around it, its association with nobility, with the excitement of far-off lands, and with the prestige at the time of the Venetian trade. I think today we see echoes of this everywhere. So like champagne sells not just bubbles, but champagne sells the story of celebration. Super Tuscans sell a story of rebellion against tradition. Even the category, we'll say natural wine, comes with a narrative, purity, authenticity, and I think more so resistance to industrialization. So Venice shows us the lesson. The power of wine lies not only in what's in the glass, but in the stories carried with it across borders and across generations. With our final chapter, Chapter 12, Synesthesia and Proust Syndrome, this is where wine storytelling becomes deeply personal. Synesthesia, the crossing of the senses, coupled with Proust Syndrome, the involuntary flood of memory triggered by smell and taste, are at the very heart of why wine moves us. Every wine professional has seen it happen. A guest tastes a Riesling and is suddenly reminded of a walk through a garden as a child. Someone smells a mature Bordeaux and recalls leather-bound books in a parent's study. For me, when I smell old Northern Rhone Syrah from Cornas, it brings me back to that memory where I first fell in love with wine. The excitement, the evocativeness of all of the aromas and flavors, that it's just a simple combination of grape juice and yeast, but it gives us a whole plethora of memories, of sensations, of emotions. Wine continues to give, and I think that's why I find it so exciting. In the book, science tells us that smell is wired directly to the limbic system, which is the seat of memory and emotion. And in storytelling, this is golden. When we describe wine, we're not just listing blackberries, cherries, or vanilla. We're unlocking the personal archives of memory for our listeners or for our guests. I think this is why wine language sometimes drifts into poetry. It's why the best sommeliers connect wine to lived experiences, not just chemistry. So storytelling through synesthesia is the bridge between the technical and the emotional, between the brain and between the heart. I think in closing, today we explored 3 chapters, chapters 10 through 12. These chapters show us the many dimensions of wine storytelling, from the structure of organized storytelling, to Venice and Malvasia as the early staging of modern branding, to the deeply personal and sensory experience of synesthesia and memory. Professor Scienza reminds us that wine stories, they're never simple. They're layered with history, commerce, memory, and especially emotion. As professionals and enthusiasts, our task is to weave these layers into stories that resonate, educate, and inspire. Thank you for listening to The Art of Wine Storytelling. I'm Ryan Robinson, and I look forward to sharing the next episode with you, where we continue uncovering the deep roots of wine's narrative power. So until then, may your next glass bring both flavor and a story.
You've been listening to The Art of Wine Storytelling by Professor Attilio Scienza, read and commented by Ryan Robinson. The book is available now on our site, Mama Jumbo Shrimp, and Amazon. Follow the Italian Wine Podcast on all the major platforms so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to rate and review us.